Howdy y'all, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for being here. Today we have a really interesting video, especially if you are interested in the before and after that occurred in the 1800s, especially in America, sometimes called the reset, the massive calculated and controlled destruction of America during the Civil War era has led many contemporary historians to begin to question the nature and tactics behind the seemingly planned demolition, especially within the South. One of the best and most well-documented examples comes to us from the old American city of Richmond, Virginia. In today's video, I'd like to briefly break down the history of Richmond from shortly before the Civil War to the decades directly after the war, while at the same time, I'd like to focus on the oldest known photographs of Richmond, Virginia that I could find. For at least 1 century, until the year 1609, the hill that overlooked the James River that would later become Richmond was at first the castle-like home of Parahunt, the chief and leader of the Powhatan tribe. This is described in detail on the 1608 John Smith map. The first contact with Parahunt and the Powhatan, and indeed with the city that would become Richmond, would occur in the year 1607, shortly after English captain Christopher Newport landed and settled on Jamestown Island. On May the 22nd of that year, Newport and his men first made contact with Chief Parahunt. Newport, upon hearing about the Powhatan's constant struggles with a local tribe, decides to aid Parahunt and the Powhatan. Gabriel Archer describes this meeting in great detail. Newport and his men are invited to Parahunt's castle, also known as Parahunt's Tower, which is located on the top of the hill. Archer records that there are 12 homes atop the hill, all connected, with Parahunt's Tower being the largest and most robust. In the open land atop the hill is planted wheat, tobacco, pumpkins, gourds, hemp, maize, and flax. By the year 1609, John Smith arrived to Jamestown Falls with a group of 120 men under Francis West. At first reluctant, Parahunt and the Powhatan eventually warmed up to John Smith, and this is where you get the Disney story of Pocahontas. John Smith brought with him Eastern technologies, and eventually John Smith felt confident enough in his relationship with the Powhatan to make an offer to purchase the falls and Parahunt's Tower. While Parahunt reluctantly agreed, according to this narrative, it seems most of the Powhatan did not understand or honor this agreement. Smith's attempts to extend the fort failed due to harassment by the Powhatan. The brother of Francis West would return to the falls the following year, but again he would face backlash and would not be able to extend the fort. No attempts were made to extend or settle Richmond or the falls or extend the fort until after the Native American massacre of 1622. Now, take this next part of the history with a grain of salt, because always history seems to be written by those who ended up owning the history or settling that area. So obviously the European explorers came into Jamestown and came into the area that would become Richmond, and they eventually took it over. So they wrote this history, but we're told in the current narrative on March the 22nd of 1622, the Powhatan, who for the decade previously were not communicating with the English, then decided to march to the English camp of the Virginia colony. And here, the Powhatan claimed they were ready to trade and assist the English once again. They were looking to rekindle that friendship. In this narrative, it continues by telling us that the English were taken back by this, but they invited the unarmed Powhatan into their homes. As more and more waves of Powhatan began to arrive to the English settlement in the Virginia colony, the mood quickly changed, and we're told that the Powhatan then disarmed the Englishman and eventually rounded them up and basically slaughtered them. We are told, and this is pretty ridiculous in this narrative, but the numbers we're given is that 1/4 of the entire population of the Virginia colony, of the European settlers in the area, the Englishmen in the area, lost their lives on that day. So that's really crazy, because it's not just in the area of the falls, and it's not just in the area of Richmond, but we're told in the entire Virginia colony, 1/4 of that entire population in 1622 was lost by the massacre. From here, we get into the development of the settlement of Richmond and how it turns into this great city and becomes the capital of Virginia and then the capital of the Confederacy during the Civil War. And as I discuss this, we've already begun to dive into some photographs of Old World Richmond and some of the aftermath photographs of the different destruction of architecture during the Civil War. But let's get into these details a little bit, and then we'll dive into these photographs together. But in the year of 1673, William Byrd was officially granted the lands that would become Richmond, and he began to try to create a positive relationship with the Powhatan. His son, William Byrd II, would take over this land in the early 1700s. Now, around this time, the population of Richmond was below 200 people, but this is when the Virginia House of Burgesses passed the Warehouse Act, basically bringing tobacco to the world, to the masses, for the first time, while also requiring that all the tobacco in the Virginia colony be graded and checked for quality. The fine tobacco growth out of Richmond led to the area growing rapidly, and by 1737, William Mayo received word that the land of the Falls of James River would be donated to Virginia by William Byrd II. Mayo would then go on to design the first street plan of Richmond, and by 1741, the name Richmond was chosen, and this is around the same time as the first Church of England, the Henrico Parish Church, would open its doors in Richmond. During the Second Virginia Convention, in the year 1775, Patrick Henry delivered his famous "Give me liberty or give me death" speech from St. John's Church in Richmond, Virginia. Virginia then changed its state capital to Richmond in the year of 1782. Thomas Jefferson was Virginia's governor during the Revolutionary War, and he would also go on to design and help lay the cornerstone for the first Virginia state capital. As we look into this history a little bit more and we begin to wonder about this architecture and why it was all destroyed during the Civil War, we have facts like the oldest Masonic Hall in America that is still in use today, that survived the war, was built in Richmond in 1785. By the year 1800, Richmond was one of the most rapidly growing cities in the South, fueled by decades of slave trade. Between 1800 and 1865 alone, it is believed that well over 300,000 people were sent through Richmond to be sold and shipped to other parts of the country. Astonishingly, as we look at those numbers, is the fact that the population of Richmond in the year 1801 was less than 6,000 people. Now, continuing with this narrative, we're told the first Bank of Richmond and the first Bank of Virginia was created and opened in 1804. The first Library of Richmond arose in 1806. The first stagecoach lines connecting the city to the greater routes of America opened in 1812, and the first regular steamboat service began serving Richmond in 1815. In 1816, construction commenced on the very first Richmond City Hall, and by 1830, the Industrial Revolution hit Richmond. We are told horse-drawn railroad lines were created by 1831, and coal deposits and mines were discovered and created in 1833. Also in 1833, the most important portion, I believe, of pre-Civil War history occurred in Richmond. That is the opening of the Tredegar Iron Works. This iron works would go on to be the largest in the entire South and the third largest in all of America, literally providing the South with great portions of its armor and ammunitions during the Civil War. Within a few years, the talk of Civil War began to grow. And with Jefferson Davis inaugurated as the president of the Confederate States in 1861, one of the first things he did was basically single-handedly start the Civil War. Davis ordered the Confederate Army to attack Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina. A few months later, when Virginia proceeded to secede from the Union, the strategic location and production of the Tredegar Iron Works, as mentioned earlier, was enough reason to make Richmond, Virginia, the capital of the Confederacy. Amongst the achievements not often discussed is the world's first ironclad battleship was created for the Confederacy in Richmond, Virginia at the Tredegar Iron Works, where over 723 tons of iron plating was crafted for this achievement. For the remainder of this video, I'd just like to go over the slew of different photographs I found of the aftermath of the architecture throughout Richmond, Virginia in the Civil War. In April 1865, Ulysses S. Grant and the Union forces took Petersburg, just a handful of miles away from the Confederate capital of Richmond. On what was labeled Evacuation Sunday, Confederate President Jefferson Davis, his cabinet, and the remaining Confederate soldiers abandoned Richmond, leaving on the one remaining open railroad line, the Richmond and Danville. Here's another fun fact we're told in this narrative. We're told it was the Confederate soldiers, upon retreating, who lit the entire city of Richmond on fire, destroying any remains of the Confederacy and any remains of these old world buildings. It seems a little remiss to me that the troops would seemingly try to destroy the very city that was their capital, a city in which many of them were raised, the city of their origin, a city with history that dated back over 250 years. The South, prideful and robust, would they really swallow that pride and destroy the very land which they had worked on for centuries? Or could it have been another way that this narrative simply does not put it? But I digress. We are told that not even a month after Richmond was reduced to rubble, we have tours being conducted by those from the North, most importantly by Abe Lincoln himself alongside his son. Interesting that in many narratives, a great city or town is destroyed and the victor proceeds to rebuild the town, city, or building. It's a sort of respect given for what was and what comes next. Not in the case of the South. Instead of helping the South rebuild or trying to unite the population after the war, to unite society, we instead have the North basically offering paid tours through the South, through the destroyed cities, through Richmond, and through the rubble. It becomes the headline of every major paper in America. The presses can't seem to post enough images of the destroyed towns of the South, and Richmond is at the forefront. With the destruction of Richmond being the headline in newspapers for months and months in 1865, and after viewing all of these photographs, do you see how, at least in my opinion, it's very hard for me to imagine that the Confederate Army would have done this to their own capital city? We have literal events, traditions being planned by the North to view and appreciate all of the destruction of the South. After Richmond is destroyed, the only ones who profit from Richmond remaining in rubble is the North. And we have the new unified ruling powers basically refusing to help rebuild Richmond. These same powers who possess the ability to rewrite the narrative, but at the same time, we have a narrative today that tells us that no, the South destroyed all of these cities. The South burned these cities as they retreated. And that is what we are expected to believe. But can you understand, at least from my perspective, how we can begin to question that, at least a little bit? We see the South is constantly being subjected to these different things after the war completed. And many times, as we look at the root causes to all of these things, we can see a justification. Slavery, obviously, is absolutely atrocious. But when we look at the architecture and the cities and the people's livelihoods that were taken during the war and the amount of structures that were destroyed, I have to wonder, was there something below the surface that really motivated the North to cause or allow or to not put out this destruction? The last thing that I would like to discuss with you and to show you the oldest known photographs of is Monument Avenue in Richmond, Virginia. Now, I would not like to really get into the modern day politics, but essentially, as you look through these monuments, these massive, beautiful statues, and different things like that, many of them do not exist in the same undamaged state today. Many of these monuments are in fact gone and have been removed in the last 5 to 10 years as America goes through a sort of awakening period. Sadly, most people who called for the destruction and removal of these statues really lack the understanding of the complex history behind these monuments and what the historical characters actually represent to those living in the areas like Richmond. I've tried to include here for you all of the oldest photographs that I could find and not include any photographs of the defaced monuments. The Monument Avenue, for its time, take the politics out of it, the statues and the beauty was absolutely epic, and it showcased some of the finest early statues and sculptures in 1800s America. But in conclusion, I'd like to ask, what stands out to you the most about the narrative history of pre-Civil War Richmond? Could you see the assistance of the indigenous people being crucial in the earliest construction of the old masonry and brick houses of Richmond? Could that be part of the reason why we have Richmond being seemingly reset during the Civil War? As we look through the ruins of Richmond, as photographed in 1865, does it appear to be damage caused by a fire? We have numerous photographs which appear to depict a town that is absolutely rocked to its core, even to the point that the streets themselves appear to be almost turned inside out, and the buildings are exposed all the way down to their infrastructure and base levels. It appears that something stronger than a fire was to blame here. But I'd love to hear what your opinion is in the comment section down below. Also, I'd love to hear what you think about Monument Avenue in the comment section down below. Do you think that the history of Richmond, Virginia has been reshaped and reset so many times for a purpose? And if so, what do you believe that purpose is? Does it have to do with all the amazing architecture? Again, I thank you all for being here. We just hit 36,000 subscribers recently, and the channel is still continuing to grow. So I thank you all so much for that. In making today's video, I believe we are starting to slowly pull back the curtain that covers so many interesting and intricate histories around the world. To see the devastation and destruction caused in Richmond and the architecture lost, basically old world in style, toppling under the narrative weight of a fire, is also very peculiar to me. Again, these photographs say a lot more than my narrative or anyone else's narrative ever could, and I'd really love to hear what you think about all of these images in the comment section down below. And finally, if you want to support me or the channel, and if you appreciate the channel or you want to help support my trip to California, you can do so at this link right here. It would mean the world to me. Any little bit of support can help the channel go leaps and bounds. But all in all, I just want to say thanks from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to what I have to say. Thank you for taking in these photographs. Thank you for embracing a different narrative. And thank yourselves for being willing to open your eyes and ears. I truly appreciate you all for that. That being said, I think I'm going to wrap up my part of the narrative on this video here. I look forward to speaking with you in the comment section and on the next video, and I can't wait to talk to you then. Cheers!